Thank you. All right, so we'll get started here now. Welcome. This call is recorded. I want to make sure that that's very clear right from the get-go, so you guys all understand that. If you have any questions, put them in the chat, or otherwise hold them to the end, and you can do like a raise hand or unmute or something like that, just to let us know. But as we're going along, any questions that are put in the chat, we'll address them in that order. And if you want specific information on any specific slide, just try to indicate which slide that is as well for us, so we know what you're talking about. Moving on, so quickly, the agenda this month. So this is a repeat of the last town hall we did earlier this month. But this month we are covering an overview of the next steps in the BEAD program. I'll give a brief update on what we've accomplished since the last town hall and the obstacles we see coming down the line. And then I'm going to hand it off to Diane Lowe for some technical details on our upcoming request for applications process. So subgrantee selection, all that wonderful stuff that I know we've been getting a lot of questions about. We'll be talking about broad strokes of that today. So moving to our challenge process update. So we've also been getting lots of questions on this. The challenge process for us came to a close on June 15th per our IPv1. We have been working with NTIA to package the data for their final review and stamp of approval. We've since submitted sample files to them and received approval on those sample files. So we have all the data we need. We're just working with NTIA to make sure that it's in a format that their automatic review process will accept and then goes to the manual review process. So there's a couple different steps in that we're going to be working through. We've also released our first issue of our newsletter Horizons last month, and the next issue will be coming out shortly with a lot of really good information on that. Outside of these town halls, that's probably one of the best ways to get access to our office broad strokes wise and look for updates on anything that changes in the office. So for example, the last one we had, which I'll be talking about in a little bit, LB 1031. And thank you very much, Rachel, for putting a lot of that information together. I want to plug her. She's done a wonderful work on a lot of our outreach materials. As we move further into the program, more and more written communications are coming out. If you're not on our distribution list or you're out of the loop, or if you know anyone that's not on our distribution list or is out of the loop, please send an email to ndot.broadbandoffice@nebraska.gov. That is again, ndot.broadbandoffice@nebraska.gov. That'll be displayed on the screen at the end of the presentation as well. But that is really where we want to receive most of the questions, and we continue to update our FAQ with any questions we receive through that email address. As I alluded to earlier, one of the things that went out in our newsletter is the LB 1031 report requirements. LB 1031 states that on or before July 30th each year, each provider operating in the state shall submit a report to the Nebraska Broadband Office that provides specific information regarding each standard internet service plan advertised by the provider and rates associated with each such plan. We have a form to fill out on their website for providers to report all of their standard internet plans. Please fill out that form once for each plan that you'd like to report. So it's each plan, you have to fill it out once. Now, I understand there's been some questions around that. I want to reiterate, if you have one plan, that's one fill out. It's like 7 questions. It's not a whole lot of information. But do that for each plan. Don't try to submit all the plans in one report. And then if you want a copy of your submitted reports, reach out to us. We're happy to provide that. We've already done that a couple of different times. No issue, just let us know, especially if you have different emails, whose email it was that you used or anything like that. Any kind of identifying information, so we make sure we send you the right reports. If you have comments on the form, just let us know. We want to make sure that if this isn't the way that will work best for our provider community, we'll look to update it or coordinate with the legislature to make sure that we're collecting the information that they're looking for us to collect. So completely open to any suggestions on that piece. So in the spirit of transparency, I do want to talk about some constraints that face the office. And this is not just us. A lot of these constraints apply to multiple different offices across the country. We've been talking with other broadband directors, broadband leaders in other states, and they're indicating that they're dealing with a lot of the same issues that we are. So this is probably pretty consistent if you've been talking with other broadband directors. The first constraint that we want to highlight is our initial proposal volume 2. We've gone through several rounds of hearing with NTA and continue to collaborate but we are caught in a national conversation around rate regulation concerning the low-income program. We also need NTA to approve our challenge process data. So far, there's been 3 states that have received approval for their challenge process. One of them is Louisiana, and then Nevada, and I think Delaware is the third one, if I'm not mistaken on that. But very, very small number of states have actually had their challenge process information approved. And if you recognize some of those states, they submitted their challenge process data months and months ago, up to 4, 5, 6 months ago. They completed their challenge process. So that gives you kind of a time horizon, or at least gives us an estimate on how long it could take to get NTA approval. Now, this has to go through a long process on NTA side. First, it goes through it's automatic filters and it's manual filters, and then they're trying to parse through all the data. They do spot checking, sampling, all kinds of stuff that involves a lot of time on their end to make sure that the inventory that we send them is up to snuff. We didn't mess with it or anything like that. It is, what is realistically represented on the state level. So there's lots of information going in that, and that could slow down the process. That's kind of why I want to bring that up. So you can understand on our end, we have a pretty good handle on the challenge process information, pretty good handle on the IPv2. We are trying to work with NTA to make sure that the program that we run, the BEAD program we run on the state level, is best for Nebraskans. Then the last thing on this list is going to be our RFA process. As I discussed, we'll be talking that more in depth for the timeline and what to expect once I hand this over to Diane. But there's a lot of different forms and information involved that we want to distill down for all of you. We are working diligently to create this program. We want this to run smoothly. We are going to be running this program for quite a few years into the future, and we want to ensure that what we start is going to be something that works all the way to 2032, 2029, and is something that a lot of providers will want to get on board with. So working through all of that, lots of man hours going into it, and thank you to Diane and her team for bearing the brunt of that, of course, and that's why she's going to be talking about that in just a little bit. So to introduce her, we'll be talking about, again, the application process. It's going to be very high level. The dates are tentative, so I want to make sure that we highlight that. I just went through a couple of the constraints that are involved in this process. The dates are tentative, but it should give you an idea of the game plan going forward. We're going to cover a lot of the terms that come up consistently as we work through this phase as well. And now I'm going to hand things off to Diane. She's our expert in this topic. If you have any questions that, you have any questions that come up, we'll be doing a Q&A at the end, so please hold them until then or put them in the chat. But with that, take it away, Diane.
Thank you and good morning. I want to note that NBO is still focused on, as our director has said many times in many places to many people, we are still focused on keeping things as simple as possible, as transparent as possible, and making sure that we are as easy to work with as possible. So bearing in mind, that is kind of what's behind everything that we're doing, but this is grant land. It's a little complicated, so bear with us a little bit. Just a quick run through of terminology and acronyms. Especially at the federal level, there seems to be a mismatch of multiple terms that mean the same thing, but it gets confusing. So I have tried to pare that down, and we will use one set of terminology in Nebraska for this process. So hopefully that will help ease some confusion. And that's what's on this slide, is just some of those basic terms. So the RFA, that's the document that's going to tell you if you want the money, here's what you need to do to get it. The DPAs are defined project areas, so we will submit applications per DPA, and we'll talk about that more in a minute. The application process will be split into 2 chunks, the organizational and project applications, and I'll talk about that in another minute. TA, because we're playing with the A's, is technical assistance, so that's help from us, that's support from us, that's answers and whatever else you need from us. We will be issuing subgrants to subgrantees. You're not going to be subrecipients. These are not going to be subawards. That will be subgrants to subgrantees. UEI is another one that is very important. If you don't already have one, please get one at sam.gov, your unique entity identifier, and FTIN or FEIN also we will need from you. Those are just some basic pieces of information. Will you go to the next slide, please? Okay, this is just a very quick overview. I've tried to chunk the grant process into phases so that it's a little bit easier to digest rather than just here's a mass of stuff. So these are the 6 phases, and I'm going to talk through these here kind of one at a time. So will you go to the next? So phase 1, this is organizational applications. We will publish the request for applications and we will publish the DPAs. You will have opportunity to look at both, to ask some questions, but then the first phase of your application will be this piece. So you have to submit an organizational application if you intend to apply for BEAD funding. However, and we will ask you to tell us which DPAs you're interested in. However, you will not be locked in to applying for only those DPAs or just those DPAs or even applying at all. If you get to the other end of it and you decide, you know what, we're not doing it, we can't require you to apply. So this just gives us an idea of where there might be gaps as far as the DPAs are concerned. So that's that piece of it. This will be heavy on organizational elements rather than having you do full applications for each DPA and therefore basically submitting the same information over and over and over. We're going to have you do it one time. So this is going to be the basic stuff. Like I said, your UEI, your FTI, and your content information. You're going to talk about capacity of your entity, of your organization. You're going to do certifications and attestations. Do you have a cybersecurity plan, and are you going to abide by the federal law and all of those fun things? You'll also give us information on ownership of your entity, of your organization. These organizational applications will be subjected to a technical screening, and the technical screening is not a gotcha, kick you out of the running kind of thing. This is a help us. We have to do a risk assessment piece. This is required by the federal rules. So this is the first step in that. We're gonna start setting some risk levels based on this, and risk levels will feed into the volume of monitoring and the frequency of monitoring that we have to do down the road, which we'll talk about in a minute. So the technical screening, if you have missing pieces, we forgot to submit this document, then we will notify you via email. You'll have 48 hours to get it turned to us, and that's it. This is basically, did they submit it or did they not? And then as I said, we'll use this to assess risk. We will publish, once we've gone through all of the organizational applications, we will publish on our website a list of approved applicants. Those are the ones that have passed the screening. As I said, not a gotcha, but they've passed the screening. We're ready to move on to the next phase. Will you go to the next slide? So these are the project applications. This is the next chunk. So this is going to be one project application per DPA, knowing that there's going to be some overlap, some common, potentially some common stuff. Each DPA is going to also have its own unique pieces. So details again are going to be published in the RFA. This phase, I want everybody to have a heads up, no direct communication with broadband office staff. In the RFA, there will be a specific contact person that you will email your questions to, and we will respond to them in writing to everyone. So you will have an opportunity to ask questions and answers, but please help us stick to the rules, help us make sure that this is an above board, a fair and equitable process. No contact with broadband office staff during this piece of it. This piece focuses on project details. You'll do the narrative, milestones, timeline, budget. We'll figure all of that stuff out here. And then we will score the applications based on the criteria that were spelled out in our IPv2, which is online, and there's our website. Once we have an approved project or a project that we'd like to approve for every single DPA in the state, we send that list to NTIA, and NTIA comes back and says, yep, you're good to go, move forward. We go to the next slide. That next slide is this piece, which is phase 3. This is the short piece. This is basically NTIA is happy with what we have. We are ready to issue subgrants. So I want to note, we intend to get the subgrant documents and all of the related, the terms and conditions and all of that stuff that's related to it out for you guys to look at before we get to this piece. So we're not trying to surprise anybody. We're not trying to pull a gotcha on anybody. It's just, we will publish those documents so that you can see what you're agreeing to before you agree to it. And we can discuss if we have to, although, we'll come back to that. So this is documents and technical assistance. This is just your subgrants and the rated documents, getting everything prepped and ready and out to you for signature, back to us for signature, and then copies to everybody. This phase will also see the beginning of formal technical assistance. So we will have some technical assistance calls to talk about some broad stroke pieces that are common to all of the projects. And then we will determine the need for calls about individual projects or meetings about individual projects, whatever. Will you go to the next slide? Okay, reporting and reimbursement is phase 4. This one is concurrent with phase 5, which is monitoring. So this is basically reporting to us and getting paid. So getting some money from us, from the BEAD program. So you're going to give us a narrative based on criteria set by NTIA. They have not determined they haven't spelled out here's exactly what we need, but they have promised to do so soon. So as soon as I see that, we'll get it integrated into our materials and make sure that you are aware up front, here is what we need you to report on, so there's no surprises on the back end. You also do a financial report, how did you spend your money, and we'll assess it based on budget, etc. Will you go to the next slide? Phase monitoring, these are, again, required by federal law. We have to do 3 kinds of monitoring. So performance, are you delivering the project you said you were going to deliver? Financial, are you spending the money the way you said you were going to spend it and within the rules? And then compliance, are you meeting the minimum federal and state compliance requirements? Are you following all the laws and stuff that are involved with this? There are a variety of methods we may use to do monitoring listed here. Most of the monitoring, in my experience, it's a lot of email, it's a lot of phone calls, not necessarily from us to you, but from you to us, because it all fits in, it's all part and parcel, right? So will you go to the next slide, please? This is the last phase, and this is down the road quite a bit, but it's always good to have a heads up. So this is closeout. So final reporting, final monitoring, disposition of equipment and other property, if that's necessary and appropriate. We do have to ensure the federal interest is protected for 10 years from the final payment on the grant per NTIA regulations or rules. So that we will build it, we will have those pieces set up. And then if there are projects that fail to meet requirements, and I'm hoping that there aren't, there may be clawbacks in or other penalties. This is where we would do that. Will you move to the next slide? This is a overview timeline tentative for all 6 phases, just to give you an idea of what we're thinking right now. So about this time, well, about September of next year is when we anticipate projects to begin. We do have in the plans up to 3 rounds of applications, the project applications, which is why there's such a long timeline from when we launch the RFA and the projects start. We're not going to spend any more time on that, make it any longer than it has to be, but it may have to be that long. We'll see. Will you go to the next? And this is tentative, again, timeline just for those first 3 phases. So the organizational application, the project application, and the documents. And I mentioned the 3 rounds. Here's where roughly those timelines would fit. We've allowed longer timeline on the front end, right? We have to allow time for the organizational applications because we're only going to do that piece once. It's the project application piece we may do in 3 rounds. So we've got to allow plenty of time for organizational applications and plenty of time for those, each of the 3 rounds of project applications. And I think that is the end of my piece. Will you go to the next?
Yep, that is the end, Diane. Thank you very much for that, all that great overview. For everyone else in the chat, please feel free to take this time to ask any questions. Trevi, do we have anything in the chat right now? Nope, seeing a head shake. So hopefully we gave you guys everything that you needed to know then. If there are no questions. But we'll give you guys an opportunity right now just to ask in case that there is something that comes up now that Diana has said her part. Not hearing anything. Okay, well, in that case, if you do have any questions, please feel free to send them to the email address that's on the screen right now, ndot.broadbandoffice@nebraska.gov. If you send your questions there, they have a high likelihood of being answered and answered in full. And then we'll also be provided the opportunity to update our FAQ to make sure everyone else has access to that same level of information. We want to make sure that we are very transparent and treating everyone in this process equally. No favorability here. So with that said, I think we're ready to end today. I'm seeing a head nod from Trevi there just to make sure that nobody snuck in there while I was talking. But good. Thank you guys so much for coming. Thank you guys so much for joining us today on this wonderful Thursday.